This is big brain time.
Today, I've decided not to just answer a question that nobody has had. Rather, today, I set out to do something incredible. Can you beat Devil May Cry 5 without walking? Specifically, this means that I was not allowed to touch the left stick on my controller at all. To clarify, the left stick is responsible for walking and running, changing the direction in which the character is facing, switching lock-on targets, and performing directional input moves like high time. So for this run, I denied myself all of these functions and set out to see if it was possible to beat the game. And I decided to do the run on Dante Must Die difficulty as well. Beginning with Nero, his movement options seemed pretty reliable right out of the gate. For long distances, Nero had a move called Hard Way that propelled him forward a great deal. Because of its huge momentum, it was even able to carry me up small lips that I would otherwise have trouble getting over. But not 1 minute into the run, and I already faced my first wall. Quite literally, a wall. Since I wasn't able to change what direction Nero was facing, by the time I got to this wall, it was almost parallel to my character. I had options to move back and forward, but not side to side. Gerbera didn't work because that required a directional input in order to carry Nero with it. I thought a charged gunshot might somehow move me to the side or just enough to touch the lip of the ledge, but it was no dice. The gunshot was only able to move me backwards and the angle was just too extreme. Riding Punchline did nothing for me and I really wasn't even sure what I thought Helter Skelter would do. Then I found my out, Tomboy. By using Tomboy, I was able to set the direction of my camera to wherever I wanted with the right stick and then press the button for Blue Rose. Due to Tomboy's unique moveset, using Blue Rose while under this Devil Breaker's effect caused Nero to enter a very specific pose, and the direction for the pose was dictated by where the camera was facing. Furthermore, adjusting where the gun was aimed in this mode was also dictated by the camera, so the left stick was not required at all. I angled myself to have Nero's back facing the wall so that I could jump up into the air and push myself forward onto the ledge with charge shots from Blue Rose. From there, I simply used Tomboy's gun mode to face myself forward again and continued down the path with Hard Way. In combat, I turned Auto Assist on. Auto Assist is a function enabled either in the options menu or by pressing and holding in the right stick. Essentially, by merely pressing the attack button repeatedly, the game would automatically use different moves, even ones that normally required directional inputs. This allowed me some form of movement in combat, as the auto assist would use Payline, Caliber, and a bunch of other moves that gave Nero forward momentum without me ever actually having to touch the left stick. Auto Assist is only active during combat, however, so it offered no assistance while trying to traverse the levels themselves. For any navigational sections between battles from this point on, it was as simple as enabling Tomboy and changing my direction with the gun. There are no required fights in Mission 1 except for the boss, but thanks to Auto Assist, the game applies a soft lock-on whenever enemies are nearby. Essentially, even if Nero were facing directly straight ahead, but there was an enemy behind me, when I would execute Hard Way, Nero would automatically perform the attack towards the enemy rather than in the direction he was already facing. This meant that I had to exterminate every enemy along the way to ensure a smooth non-walk to the boss. I wasn't sure how the Clifod routes were going to go, considering I was just going to be standing in place the entire time, but by abusing Nero's triple jump, the routes could hardly ever hit me. As a quick note, I put a ton of time and effort into these challenges and videos that I make. If you like the stuff I do, then please subscribe if you aren't already. This was by far my largest and longest project yet, and I hope to continue doing even more crazy things in the future. Your support would really help me along the way. But either way, enjoy the rest of the video. I encountered the soft lock-on issue once again in Mission 2. At one point, while I was trying to take out a bunch of enemies, the game decided to soft lock on to an enemy way over in the direction that I happened to be needing to go. By the time I got there and took the enemy out though, the very same soft lock-on wanted to pull me back to the enemies that I had just left behind. So I sat there, charged my gun, and waited for them to go away so that I could just continue along my path. I tried to skip this encounter by using hardway, and I got surprisingly close. But I fell in and had to fight some hell Antinora. The Goliath fight started off surprisingly well. Thanks to auto assist, I was able to stay in his face and enemy step off of him to dodge his various punches and swings. While still inside the church, I managed to knock him down and get a buster on him, and he fell below half health before we even got to the outside portion of the fight. I got another buster on him once the fight ended up outside, but I couldn't change the direction of where he was thrown. Normally in this animation, you can change where Nero ends up throwing Goliath, but that direction is dictated with the left stick, so I just had to let him be thrown wherever the game wanted. After he exploded and I got back over to him, the fight started going very south. I was consistently in the exact wrong places, which caused me to get smacked around by a bunch of his swings. I tried to stay as high in the air as possible and whittled the rest of his health down with charged shots for safety. I might not have been one hit from death by the end, but it was still too close for comfort. Traveling along the rooftops and sewer tunnels using Nero's movement options was a cakewalk, but I encountered an unexpected issue while climbing the stairs: a small gap. My initial plan was to get as close to the edge as possible, adjust my angle to face it straight on, and jump the gap using hardway. That didn't work, so on my next climb up, I turned Nero around, jumped as high as possible, and used the knockback from the charge shot to push myself across the gap. Artemis was a relatively normal fight. I was able to use the gun to shoot down her flying apparatuses, and as always, she failed to charge up her spirit bomb. Near the end of the fight, auto assist seemed like it really wanted her to do it though, because the game kept deciding it wanted Nero to use double down to send me all the way back to the ground. It almost worked, but unfortunately for Artemis, the score is still 0 to a lot. It was time to figure out how to move with V. Normal swipes with the cane inched him forward, and if lock-on was held, V would do a long-distance teleport, so his forward movement was already nice. But how was I going to turn with him? I didn't have Tomboy or any sort of way to aim and change direction like I did with Nero. Side dodging with Shadow was tied to using the left stick, so that was out of the option, and all of his other moves were also tied to his pets, so they didn't outright affect him or his positioning in most cases. What V did have, however, was a taunt. There are 3 or 4 taunts that V is able to perform without any style rank, and one of them was the key to this run. For the taunt in question, V lets out a small nod or chuckle and turns 180 degrees clockwise from the direction he was facing. Better still, this taunt was able to be cancelled at any point in the animation, which meant that I was able to determine the exact direction I wanted to face by performing the taunt and ending it when I was facing the desired direction. It got a bit awkward whenever I was faced with a left turn, because the taunt would only turn clockwise, so I had to perform it twice in order to face the direction I wanted in those cases. Movement with V was certainly slower than it was with Nero, but regardless, I had a consistent way to navigate the levels, so I was content with it. As I sat in this fight, watching V's pets do work with auto assist on, I realized something. The game was better at playing V than I was, and you know what? I'm okay with that. When I needed to get over certain walls or other environmental obstacles, V was still able to perform his teleport in the air, and I could also alternatively do a double jump and hold on to Griffin, which would cause me to glide forward for a short distance. I was expecting quite the fight from Nidhogg, but it turned out that he was extremely weak to V just jumping straight up in the air. All I did was let my auto assist pets take care of stuff while I charged Devil Trigger, and whenever I summoned Nightmare, he took care of the rest. Mission 5 was a little awkward to maneuver through, especially right around here. The game applied a soft lock-on to an exploding barrel that was on the other side of a wall. This was a major issue because I had to use V's cane swings to move forward, and the game was forcing him to swing towards the wall in the direction of the barrel instead. Thankfully, I managed to sneak some griffin shots through the scaffolding and blow up the barrel to continue forward. Once again, I was expecting Garion to put up more of a fight, but he was relatively simple. I think I got somewhat lucky that he didn't use his lightning AoE right next to me very often, because I don't think I had a way to dodge it other than attempting to iframe it with Devil Trigger. Remember that you're watching a Lucid Enigma video, so even though I say he was relatively simple, the fight still ended up with a full-on slugfest between two contenders who were at death's door. But ultimately, I came out on top. Speaking of Death's Door, I'd like to direct your attention to my health in this Gilgamesh fight. Although, my low health blues in this particular instance were due in no small part to auto-assist feeling the need to ram Nero's face into multiple exploding barrels like they made fun of his mother or something. Despite all of the self-damage, I still managed to get by with a little help from a friend.
I'm coming, Nero. Just hold on a while longer. If I could only just get up onto this platform. Finally, I've made it. I hope you weren't expecting any Scooby snacks today, Shadow.
2 hours later.
Finally. Nero, I've knocked it down.
Thanks, V.
I can't believe I had to help him defeat this thing. What a dead weight.
What'd you say?
This happened in Mission 7, and for Mission 8, I was tasked with some pretty intensive platforming given the circumstances. I angled myself with my back to the rising platform, lined it up just right, and no, the lamppost stopped me, so when I climbed back up, I had to put myself further away from the wall and jump over it instead. I used a standing charge shot to push myself back slightly once on the platform, and then one more charge shot in the air to get up to where I needed to be. As I approached the first falling platform section, I wondered if there was any possible way to make it to the other side. I used hard way to propel myself as far into the arena as possible, and I jumped as high as I could. I pulled lizards toward me for enemy step purposes to sustain my height, and I used charge shots to try to push myself back. But I was drifting further away from the exit, and it didn't seem like I was gonna make it. Suddenly, an enemy changed its position in such a way that my charged shots began propelling me towards the exit, and by some miracle, I managed to just barely make it to safety. Then I slipped off, had a couple heart attacks, and got back up, like it never happened. No big deal. I got to the second hardcore parkour section, and I knew that I had to do things a little differently this time around. While the first platforming section was a linear left to right path, the exit platform for this section was on the left instead. I had to put myself onto the rising platform, use Tomboy to turn myself around as I was rising up, and charge my gun to propel myself off to solid ground again. There was plenty of time for me to do it, and I even messed up and released my charge too early at one point, and I still made it with no issue. But for some reason, that entire section still had me nervous. When it came time for fighting Urizen, I actually turned auto assist off. My reasoning was that it would constantly pull me towards or use moves to put me right in the crystal's face, and I didn't have much in the way of dodging some attacks while I was that close. I felt that my chances were better if I hung back, used charge shots on the crystal, and baited out Urizen's fireballs so that I could parry them back with my Devil Trigger explosion. After a few minutes of that, the crystal broke, and it was back to V. It was the dawn of Mission 10, and just about time for Dante. Before even going in, my initial assumptions for Dante were that he had a ton of options, so surely he could move in any direction he wanted with ease. He had taunts, trickster, tons of weapon moves that provided movement. Dante was gonna be easy mode, right? Wrong. That couldn't have been farther from the truth. At the beginning, Trickster dashing worked well enough to trigger the first Impusa to spawn, which allowed me to lock onto it and forcibly change Dante's direction. Auto assist in combat worked pretty well with Dante, but I had even less agency in what he was doing than with the other characters. If I tried to switch styles, for example, from Swordmaster to Trickster to dash, auto assist would override my input and decide to do a Swordmaster move instead. In addition, it automatically switched weapons at will, so I also had very little say in what weapon I wanted to use in any given situation. But the real challenge came after the fight. When the Impusa Queen died, Dante was facing a direction that wasn't where I needed to go, which meant that I had to figure out how to turn. I experimented with every move that didn't require the left stick, including taunts. Dante had one specific taunt that turned him around similar to V's taunt, but for whatever reason, while it visually changed Dante's direction, when jumping or attacking to cancel the taunt, he resumed facing his original direction, so that was out of the picture. I tried normal moves, gun moves, style moves, and nothing seemed to change Dante's direction. At least not very noticeably. There was one move, however. Cavalier Combo B. During my initial testing, I wrote the move off almost immediately, but as I went through various options and tests by running my face into a wall repeatedly, I noticed that something had changed my direction ever so slightly to the right. I did further testing and discovered that it was Cavalier Combo B. By using Cavalier Combo B repeatedly, something about the animation of Dante getting on and off of the bike caused his direction to shift just barely in a clockwise direction. With enough uses of this move, I was able to turn all the way around and get myself facing the exit that I needed. There was a major flaw with this directional rotation strategy though. Cavalier Combo B has a large amount of forward movement associated with it, and it only turned me to the right and not the left. So in instances where I needed to move left, especially in linear hallways, the forward movement would end up sending me all the way back down the length of the hallway before I was able to turn to the direction that I needed. Thankfully, Dante had several ways of pushing himself back, so rather than using the bike to turn myself all the way around, I simply had to have my back face the left turns. The first movement option that I had to move Dante backward was swapping between Swordmaster and Gunslinger. This movement had Dante's position shift backwards and slightly to his left. It was exceptionally useful for gliding Dante's character model against the ridges of the walls in this mission. The second option that I had was Cascade with the dual Kalina Ands. This move was a large push that sent Dante directly backwards and had properties similar to Nero's Hard Way, which meant that it was useful if I got stuck on a small hump or piece of the environment. At the end of the second encounter, I waited for the Judecca to appear facing the exit so that I could lock on and end the fight already looking at where I needed to go next. And it was another left turn. A very, very left turn. Ramming my face into the wall with the Trickster dash was enough to push me relatively far in, and remember when I said swapping between Swordmaster and Gunslinger moved Dante slightly to his left? I was able to use that to my advantage here. Since the wall was keeping me from moving backwards, swapping styles allowed me to push myself to the left in the direction that I needed to go. All was going well until I hit a piece of geometry that caused me to stop moving. I tried using Cascade to push myself over it, but that didn't work either. I had to adjust my positioning with Cavalier, and thankfully I was far enough into the tunnel that I wasn't sent all the way back to the start for using it. After a few angle adjustments, I was free to sword gun my way to the exit. I really didn't want to have to do all that again, so I fought these chaos fair and square for a checkpoint. The path forward was to my right, so it was a simple matter of using Cavalier until I made it there. But at the end of that path was another left turn, and this one was essentially 180 degrees. I adjusted my direction slightly with Cavalier and then used Cascade to push myself back along the wall. I got stuck again, but thanks once more to the style swapping, causing Dante to move slightly to the left, I used a Trickster dodge to go forward, and by the time I hit the wall from style swapping again, I had moved past the bit that I was stuck on. I was just barely off from dropping down into the Fury Arena, and I had to use Cavalier a few more times to adjust my positioning. Shoutouts to my gun-only challenge run that taught me a very effective strategy for dealing with Fury without ever having to move. I was able to jump and knock the Fury down with a shotgun shot and get a cascade blast off while it was on the ground. After only 2 or 3 of those, the Fury was done. As I backed myself down another 180-degree left turn, I entered a hallway where some enemies spawned. This wasn't a required fight, so I locked onto one of the Impusa to force Dante to face directly down the hallway, and I just used Trickster to dash right past all of them. At the end of the hall was another left turn, and I used style switching to slide my way along the wall once again. I adjusted my direction so that I could push myself into the next arena, and then I let auto assist go to work. I entered this long hallway section facing backwards, so I had to push myself the entire way. Somehow the fight in this hallway ended up getting carried all the way back to the wall that I had just came from. So after the fight, I had to readjust and back that booty up the entire hallway again. After numerous cascade shots, I finally reached the next doorway. Except my angle was slightly off, and I had no way of sliding to where I needed to go with the position that I was currently in. I was forced to use Cavalier to turn myself around, and that meant that I ended up going all the way back down the hallway again, just so I could navigate up it for a 3rd time. Michael Jackson's moonwalk got nothing on Dante. I tried going up these stairs backwards, but after that, I couldn't find a good angle to get to the next area, so I ended up backtracking and turning around in the room that I started in. Not long after that, I was faced with a true challenge: parkour. I had to get up onto the ledge above Dante, and truth be told, there was a relatively simple and easy way of doing this, but I didn't discover it as an option until after I had already completed this section the hard way. At this point, I was working under the assumption that my only option was to perform a 700-point turn and get the proper angle to trickster dodge up onto the ledge. So that's exactly what I did. I performed 2 or 3 Cavalier combos max, backed myself up and slid myself against the wall to reposition, and then I repeated the process until I managed to force Cavalier to drive into the small cubby near the ledge that I needed to get onto. Upon making it up, I was faced with even more platforming. This is where I discovered what would have made my life so much easier in the last part. Kalina and shots push Dante back in midair. By discovering this, I was able to get myself onto a small platform with relative ease. This is how easy that last section could have been. While using certain moves, the game doesn't actually allow you to fall off of ledges. Cavalier Combo B is one such move, so I was free to turn myself around to whatever angle I needed on this platform without worrying about losing progress. I got into position and used Trickster to propel myself to victory. I only had one more platforming section, and then it was a small jaunt to the end of the mission, but it was also the most technical of the 3 sections that I had faced. There was once again a small platform I was able to get onto, and from there it was a matter of lining everything up and then timing it correctly. In all of the tests that I performed for this section before starting the run, I only found one angle that lined me up with the first 2 platforms in such a way that the wall could potentially push me onto the 3rd. However, in all of my tests, the wall never actually managed to push me far enough over that I could land on the 3rd platform. I always fell short. There was one other angle that was an extra Cavalier turn from the other angle, and I deemed this the bad angle. I would sometimes get this angle when I wasn't paying attention to my positioning, and essentially, I was able to land on the first platform, but not the second, and then there was just no way for me to reach the 3rd. Well, there was one way that I could reach it. I specifically saved my Devil Trigger for this section. In Devil Trigger, Dante gained access to 2 extra jumps and 2 extra Trickster dashes. By using Devil Trigger, I was able to line myself up more towards the middle, skip the 2nd platform altogether, and make it to the 3rd platform with relative ease. From there, I just jumped up to the top, and I was on my merry way. As I progressed through the fights, I started to feel that auto assist was hurting me more than it was ever helping, so by this point I decided to turn it off completely and simply juggle the enemies with my motorcycle. The Urizen fight to cap off Mission 10 was on a timer, so all I had to do was not die and I was finally out of the Clyphod. Mission 11 started out with some enemies in a hallway that weren't required, so I used them to angle myself and continue forward. When my angle was running me into a wall, I waited for a nobody to come over. I dodged it so that it would move past me, and then I pressed onward. Certain cutscenes would force Dante to face a specific direction after they played, which saved me a ton of busy work trying to turn myself to get up this path. This building had some platforming in it, but it wasn't nearly as difficult as navigating through Mission 10. I cleared the first route, dropped down and hit the second one, and I forgot about the third one. I don't know what I was thinking, but I climbed all the way back up, only to find a solid wall still blocking my path. I had to maneuver my way back down, and in my attempt to climb back up after I had taken care of the third route, I wound up in this optional encounter. Once I got angled after the fight though, I was actually able to skip most of the platforming, but it was still a pain. Out of all of the things that I didn't expect to have trouble with, getting into this doorway specifically had to be among the most difficult. It was such an awkward angle and I didn't have a good way of entering it. The issue wasn't necessarily getting into the doorway itself, but progressing past it. When I pushed myself backwards into the room, the next platform was directly to my left and I had no way to get onto it. Trying to turn with Cavalier simply saw me drive out of the room, and then I was back to square one. I tried entering from multiple different angles, but none of them seemed to work. Eventually, I had to get a pretty steep angle, but rather than push myself directly backwards, I had to push myself back and to the right, or Dante's left, with style switching, and only then did I manage to fail again. For whatever reason, I wasn't able to get enough backward distance from the Kalina and shots to push me onto the platform. After all that work, I had to start from zero and try something even more creative. After the heartbreaking failure with the dual Kalina ands, I determined that the only way I was getting up there was with a trickster dash. So I turned myself all the way around and attempted to get as straight of an angle as I possibly could. I didn't know if this was gonna work, but I started using style swapping to inch myself towards the doorway. I just barely touched my back to the pillar, and that was all that I needed. I was sliding along the wall and my success was guaranteed. And give me a second. There we go. My strategy for Cavalier Angelo was pretty much the same as usual. I royal guarded his attacks and built up my Sin Devil trigger. Once my style rank got high enough, I used quadruple S to quickly transform into SDT. This allowed me to teleport directly to him and completely obliterate his health. In the end, I got a nice cascade finish. Mission 12 opened up with the bane of my existence as Dante: more platforming. Luckily, as I entered the main room of the mission, my angle was good enough to allow me to get onto the first platform that led to the Nidhogg hatchling. While turning with Cavalier, I had to be extremely careful because unlike most other platforms with invisible walls to prevent from falling off, if I drove onto the gargoyle head with the bike, nothing was there to stop me from falling right off. As a result of trying to be careful, my angle was a bit skewed, but I backed myself up as far as I could, and then I used the trickster dash and style switching's leftward movement to sneak myself into the doorway. Once I got into the room, it was a simple matter of moving myself along the wall until one trickster dash and a bit more backing up put me directly in front of the hatchling. And this was where I found out that the prompt to grab the hatchling only appeared if I was facing the thing. I ended up having to drive out into the previous room to turn myself around, but when I attempted to do so, I used combo B one too many times and ended up driving right off the platform, just like I was worried about doing before. What ensued thereafter was some of the longest, most awkward angle and position juggling I had done up to this point. There was a number of sections along the circular room's walls where I could get stuck in, and beyond that, there was a statue and a bunch of other geometry blocking my path through the middle of the area. Overall, I spent a total of about an hour just attempting to get up and grab that damn Nidhogg hatchling. I eventually found my way onto the stone next to the platform that I needed to get onto, and that gave me a much tighter area where I was able to adjust my angle and get through to the hatchling. In this hallway, rather than attempting to carefully adjust my angle and back myself up this left turn, I chose to enter the dead end in order to spawn 2 chaos. Then, I used the lock-on and positions of the chaos to guide me up to the blood clot that I needed to smack. After I took care of the room with the Furies, I thought I was conveniently facing the direction I needed to go, but in actuality, I wound up going the wrong way and made way more of a headache for myself. After breaking the final clot, I needed to head right, but I didn't want to end up driving into the Nidhogg hatchling room while trying to turn. Breaking the clot gave me a checkpoint, so I tried restarting from checkpoint in the hopes that the game would give me a better angle to work with. It adjusted my angle slightly, and I was further back than I was previously, so I was able to work with that. As I fell down to the central room, I was careful not to overshoot the hatch in the middle. Once I got to the bottom, it became very apparent to me that my angle was not going to allow me to easily get into the hatch, and I thought I was about to have to maneuver my way around this room again for another hour just trying to get something to work. But with some style switching and a fortuitous Cavalier usage, I managed to just sneak by into the hatch without much issue. Once in the tunnel, I was in the home stretch. Literally, I just had to get inside of Dante's home. The task turned out to be harder than anticipated. I restarted from checkpoint again with the hopes of being placed in a direct line to the house, but it placed me at an even worse position. I meandered my way back to the entrance of the home and tried to enter it from the side like I did with the doorway in Mission 11, but a broken table blocked my path once I got inside. Ultimately, I found myself with my back facing the house and pushed myself inside with Cascade. Phew, glad that's over and I never have to do that again. Oh. On my second go-around, I made it out of the tunnel with a good leftward angle, so I was able to slowly adjust my angle outside and then slide my way back into the house. Easy. This Urizen fight started out with me and Sin Devil Trigger, so I immediately broke his crystal. I used air combo B with Cavalier as much as possible in an attempt to keep Urizen knocked down. A lot of his attacks were difficult to avoid, so the longer I kept him down, the less that I had to worry about. I filled my SDT bar again, but I waited until he resummoned his crystal so that I could smash it immediately once again. I really didn't want to have to maneuver my way into the house for a third time, so once he summoned his crystal again, I equipped the hat. And because he caused me so much trouble in the first place, you know I had to send him off with a rose. And you're set free. Nero by far had the quickest and easiest movement options, so he was my natural pick for Mission 13. Shoutouts to Lightspeed DX, who was playing Dante while I was doing this mission, because this guy put in a ton of work. I found him in the second to last room and assisted in clearing it out, but as he continued on, I had a bit of trouble trying to get into the hole. Once I finally hobbled my way to the final area, Lightspeed had already cleared pretty much all of the spawners. It was an easy cleanup, and then we both pressed onward. I don't know who you are, but good luck on your playthrough, Lightspeed, and thanks for the assist. As I entered V's final mission, I made my way down the path and was planning out my boss route. Since I couldn't move, I had to be very selective in not only which pets I chose, but the order in which I did the bosses as well. I remembered that Cavalier had lightning he could call down, and I didn't have any way of quickly moving to avoid it, so that was essentially forced damage. He was probably going to be the last boss that I tackled because of that. I thought about doing Artemis first, but she also had a number of moves that were very difficult, if not impossible, to avoid without moving as V. Artemis did, however, have the lowest health of the 3 bosses, so I'd certainly want to do her before Cavalier. That left me with the option of doing Goliath first. I would take Shadow, do my best to enemy step on Goliath to stay above his attacks, and take him out. From there, Griffin and Shadow should be more than enough to swiftly dispatch Artemis, and then I could have Nightmare go toe-to-toe with Cavalier in the final bout. But before I could enact any of the plan I had just mapped out in my head, I jumped over this wall and suddenly I was powerless. This was a forced slow walk section. As fate would have it, the game put me into a state that removed all of my abilities. I couldn't summon my familiars, I couldn't attack, I couldn't jump, I couldn't even taunt. But there was still some hope. If I restarted the mission and got a better angle into the room, I could potentially use V's teleport to get over the wall and skip the trigger that took away my options. Alas, there was an invisible wall that stopped me. I sat there in defeat as I came to terms that this was going to be the end of the run. After discovering how to move with Nero, after figuring out all of the niche intricacies associated with Dante, the reason that this run was going to fail was because the game itself decided to take away my options. The last shred of hope left me as I despairingly spammed any and every button on my controller. But then I noticed it. There was a single button that caused V to do something. When I pressed it, V did a simple animation of picking up his cane. As lock-on disengaged, he put the cane back down. But when he picked that cane up, V took the slightest step forward. I picked a spot on the ground and watched it to make sure that I wasn't hallucinating, and then it was confirmed. I didn't have to use the left stick to move. I could move by spamming lock-on. Currently, I'm playing the clip of this section at 4 times speed. Even still, you and I would be sitting here for well over 10 minutes before V would reach the cutscene trigger. In total, the entire section from the wall to the cutscene by all those stones up ahead took 48 minutes. There couldn't have been a slower form of movement, but I didn't care. I didn't have to use the left stick, and that was all that mattered. The plan that I had thought out for the bosses ended up working exactly how I had hoped. I smacked Goliath around with Shadow and my cane, Griffin and Shadow made short work of Artemis, and Nightmare punched Cavalier for me while I read my book. The penultimate mission with Nero went very smoothly. Against Malphus, I was able to stay above her whenever she would charge at me, and charged level 3 blue rose shots were my greatest tool in this fight. She liked to teleport around a lot, so it was difficult for me to keep up with her for melee hits. Pretty late into the fight, Malphus began using a move where she would teleport down directly on top of me. Since I couldn't move out of the way, if I didn't have Devil Trigger to use in order to iframe it, I was guaranteed to get hit by this move. After I got hit by it, I made sure to save Devil Trigger in case she used it again, and that decision ended up saving my life and getting me the W. Dante's last long mission was all about falling to progress. This made my job way easier than in his previous missions because there were no awkward doorways I had to squeeze myself into or platforms that I needed to climb on top of. Each room allowed me the area I needed in order to use Cavalier to change my direction. There was never a risk of backtracking and losing progress, and I never got stuck and had to do any special maneuvers to try and make something work. There was the matter of getting into Cerberus's boss arena, but by reaching the bottom, I got a checkpoint, so I reloaded and that gave me a much better position to work with. I ended up dying to Cerberus multiple times, and I found that there were a number of elements within the fight that caused issue. In his lightning phase, it was difficult to dodge certain moves because I had to time my trickster dashes properly. In his ice phase, it was even more difficult to dodge a majority of the things he was able to do. Between calling ice shards down directly onto my position to freezing breath and ice spike rain, trying to damage him from up close or far away was a struggle. Additionally, whenever he decided to transition between elements, I had to essentially get lucky and hope I was able to trickster dash far enough away from the explosion without a wall getting in my way. I was feeling real sick of this fight, so I called up my doctor and he gave me the prescription. Cerberus can't actually be killed during an element shift, so it was the perfect opportunity to set him free as well. I used the Royal Guard trick against Final Urizen to enter Sin Devil Trigger, and I got him into Phase 3 pretty comfortably. From there, I incorporated the same strategy I did against Second Urizen. I tried to keep him staggered or knocked down as much as possible with Cavalier's air combo B. Did it cause me to take tons of damage on certain occasions? Yeah, but was it worth it? Honestly, probably not. I'm sure there were better options, but it got the job done. I got a particularly high style point score on Mission 17, so I decided to look at the details, and I discovered that there's actually a bonus awarded for not walking, or running at the very least. I must give props once again to my gun-only challenge run that taught me which weapons made Griffin and Shadow trivial. The shotgun kept Griffin locked in place until stalemate, and the dual Kalina Ans did the same for Shadow. The only awkward part of this mission was attempting to get through the last blood vein thingy to the final arena. I ended up behind it, and I had to push myself along the curves of the wall at a certain angle until I was just about lined up with it. Similar to the Nidhogg hatchlings, the prompt to enter the vein thing didn't show up unless I was facing it, which is what made this part so specific. I had less than half health going into the nightmare fight, and I died multiple times as a result. So Dr. Faust came out to play once more, but even then the fight was looking pretty sketchy. Nightmare tried to spin to win, but ended up sealing his own fate by breaking a healing pillar that boosted my health all the way back to full. Once he entered stalemate, I turned auto assist on and let the AI decide how to finish him. And it chose to dance a jig on his corpse with Cerberus. Against Virgil, I used Royal Guard and Sin Devil Trigger to damage him until just before he was going to Devil Trigger. From there, I stun-locked him with Dr. Faust and got him below half health. Once he Devil Triggered, I used my SDT transformation to do as much damage as possible. I was able to stay above his judgment cuts with Enemy Step and decimate his health with Faust, and I had Balrog equipped simply to break the summon swords that he would spawn around me. Virgil died so quickly that he didn't even have time to call his doppelganger. Unlike a majority of fights with Nero, I opted to do this fight with auto assist off. After 3 knockbacks, Virgil became susceptible to a buster and was put into a downed state. I used that time to deal massive damage to him and finish it with a buster. When he wasn't staggered, I fired off charged shots from Blue Rose for damage because he liked to teleport a lot. Anytime he did Rapid Slash, I dodged it with an air hike and was able to get a full melee combo on him. This strategy worked even into Virgil's later phases when he became more aggressive. Nero's third jump and ability to stall in the air meant that judgment cuts were never able to hit me, and that was pretty much all she wrote for the fight. So, Devil May Cry 5 without walking. There you have it. Every mission can be cleared without ever touching the left analog stick. These are the kinds of challenges that I enjoy the most. I had to get exceedingly creative to problem solve some of the situations I was put in, and for a majority of the game, it felt like I just barely had enough options at my disposal to actually get by. The real struggle wasn't the difficulty setting or the enemy encounters in this one. It was instead the level design and movement options that I had to work with. A majority of the battles I fought on this playthrough weren't with health or Devil Trigger, but with geometry and angles. If you've ever thought about this challenge and wondered if it was possible, so did I. And today, I decided to answer that question for everyone. Yes, you can beat Devil May Cry 5 without walking. Good night, everyone.